Wilburn. It's hard not to turn to the issue of the day. The issue of the day is, of course, the volatility in our financial markets, the collapse of those markets. Tim Russert, the late Tim Russert, in conversation with your candidate, Bob, elicited from your candidate, from Senator McCain, his confession that, I quote, he knows little about economics. Senator McCain has tried several times to deny that he either made the statement or denies that he knows little about economics, but given his initial statement that the fundamentals of the economy were sound at a time when the market was plummeting downward, it seems to me that those statements are a little suspect. It's also disconcerting to some of us that his actions in response to this seem to be more calculated than helpful. For example, the prospect of him suspending his campaign, packing up his abacus to go to Washington, D.C. to solve the financial mess. Now, all of this looks a little bit like, at least in terms of the first statement, his confession that economics is not his thing, as being honesty but caught off guard. The second and third about his solving the financial problem being more grandstanding than true. What exactly will your candidate do to address the difficulty in the financial markets, and why would it make any difference?
Well, what he would do, in essence, is follow the strategy of your old boss when you were on the side of the angels, our side. Ron Reagan. John McCain would lower taxes on capital, not raise it, because John McCain understands that one of the things that prolonged the Great Depression was raising taxes at precisely the wrong time. John McCain would insist on transparency in Wall Street without bringing back the Carter years of regulation, high spending, and tax policy that undermined American growth and initiative. John McCain's strong suit is not economics, but the types of people that John McCain will bring to Washington and the types of policies that John McCain has supported over the years has yielded unprecedented peace and prosperity. And you can't beat anything with nothing, so you have to compare McCain on this score to Barack Obama, and all of his instincts based on past crisis for dealing with this one are wrong. He wants to raise taxes on capital gains 15 to 20%. He wants to raise capital taxes and other taxes on the most productive members of the economy, which is going to put us in the European zone of taxation on marginal rates. And if you look at Europe's stagnation over 25 years, and if your choice is free markets or government, John McCain may not be an expert on the arcane numbers of the economy, but his basic instincts to rely on markets rather than government has proved timeless. So given that comparison, and given that your former Mitt Romney is probably going to be John McCain's Secretary of the Treasury, I think of all people, Doug, you should have great confidence in John McCain now that Mitt Romney is going to be on his team.
Well, Mitt Romney is a splendid person, and unfortunately was passed over in the Republican considerations. I fail, frankly, Bob, to see the direct economic answer on how the Reagan-esque cutting of tax rates at the highest end actually addresses the financial mismanagement in the markets. It seems to me that John McCain, who of course, along with his advisors, spearheaded the deregulation of the financial markets, has a lot of explaining to do. One of the things that Senator Obama has pointed out, rather than grandstanding about suspending his campaign and running to Washington, he assembled a group of very fine economic advisors such as Paul Volcker and Robert Rubin. And even before that, 6 months before the financial crisis, Senator Obama said this: we have deregulated the financial sector and we face a crisis. This is March. A regulatory structure set up for banks in the 1930s needed to change because the nature of business had changed by the time the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed by John McCain in 1999. The $300 million lobbying effort that drove deregulation was more about facilitating mergers and than creating an efficient regulatory framework. And since then, we've seen 21st century innovation, including aggressive introduction of new and complex financial instruments like hedge funds and non-bank financial companies with outdated 20th century regulatory tools. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not all that complicated. We're given all these words like credit default swaps and derivatives, but in fact it goes back to basic common sense. Was anybody in the financial transaction actually evaluating the strength of the collateral, the assets, and the wherewithal and the responsibility of the debtor to repay the debt? And it turns out that the regulatory structure that Mr. McCain facilitated with his planning was to invite the answer no. No one would investigate that, and the sky would be the limit, not for purposes of stimulating economic activity, but for filling the pockets of those who would know no limits other than their own greed.